The conscience is the presence of God in every human being. I know it quite well. I can tell you many, many stories about personal experiences I have had in my life. And I tell you that being, being in peace with yourself, doing the right things in your life is the best thing for yourself and for your future. I don't want to speak about afterlife or anything like that, but I can tell you that when you are at peace with your conscience, you are a happy individual.
And welcome to another installment of Behind Greatness by Inspire. It is, as usual, Luciano here as your host. Thank you for listening in again. We really do appreciate your auditory companionship. And while we have it, and before we get started with our next guest, I do want to remind you, please, if you can, and if you have some time, please rate us and share with your family and friends. Again, I say this is how we're growing. It's an organic growth, and it's exciting. It's very exciting for us as we're getting feedback almost on the daily from people around the globe who have been listening to our episodes, and telling us that they're learning, telling us that they're excited listening to some of the stories and the discussions that we're having. I think today's guest is going to contribute to that in a very big way, and so we're excited to have him. His name is Luis Zuñiga Rey. Luis is a former Cuban political prisoner who served 19 years in prison. He was a member of the United States and Nicaragua's delegations to United Nations in Geneva. And Mr. Zuñiga has given lectures on Cuban affairs at universities and political centers all around the world. He is a frequent guest at radio and television shows about Cuba in the US, especially, and also a little bit recently in Canada. And has been an author to various articles in newspapers and social media over the years, and we'll put reference to those as well in the show notes. Luis studied engineering in Cuba, and that's where I think some of our story is going to commence, and managerial accounting in the US. Welcome to the show, Luis.
Well, thank you, Luciano, for the invitation, and glad to be with your many audiences around the world.
So thank you. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our mutual friend, Danny Torkia. So Danny is an old friend of mine. We've known each other over 20 years. And he called me up to let me know that he is working with you and another guest who's going to come on the show as well. And he gave me a little bit about your story, and he knew very well that I would be very interested in meeting you. So he put us together, and thanks to him. Here's the first question to you. What is, and I see here for the listeners who might be coming in on video, and they'll see a poster behind you. What is the Assembly of Cuban Resistance?
Well, it's a coalition of organizations inside and outside Cuba. Organizations in Cuba lack official recognition, as there is no freedom of association in the island, so they are groups associated, let's say, individually. But indeed, they still work because in certain areas like human rights, like labor organizations, which are not, as I told you before, legally associated, but they'll still try to do their best in the demands for rights and freedoms and so on. And outside Cuba, particularly in the U.S., in Spain, and in different other countries, there are organizations of political exiles which are legally organized and established, and this Assembly of a Cuban Resistance is a coalition of those groups inside and outside Cuba that struggle, that looks for the democracy and a democratic change in Cuba.
I got to tell you, before I ask you my next question, I read, and this is not even a laughing matter. It's so beyond my understanding. What you've lived through, you'll find in me a little bit of envy, and maybe we'll go through it. Maybe the listener will share some of that envy as well, because I want to explore why I feel envious in certain respects when I listen to your story. But I got goosebumps reading the notes again in preparation for this conversation from our last conversation. I got goosebumps. I can't believe. I just can't believe that somebody I know went through something like this. So let's get right into it. You were born in Havana in 1947.
Correct.
Your dad was a lawyer. Your mom was a homemaker, took care of the family. And you were a young boy when Castro's resistance rose and overthrew the military junta in Cuba.
Correct.
At first, your family and Cubans were positively inclined towards what was happening. They wanted to be free from the military dictatorship, so to speak. And Fidel Castro represented that sense of liberation.
Correct. My father particularly was against the Batista's military junta. My father, as an attorney, was a Democrat. He wanted respect for the freedoms, basic freedoms and liberties. And besides, he was against the corruption. There was a high degree of corruption in the Batista regime, and he rejected that deeply.
But then things started to change. And you were explaining to me how they were changing. And your dad gave you and your brother, so you have an older brother.
Yes.
And if I understood correctly, he passed away recently.
Yes, 3 years ago, he was a doctor, a physician.
As a physician in Cuba for the longest time. But he gave you and your brother some advice, and he said not to get involved, not to support communism. But there was a catch that you found in the system when you entered university.
Yes, there were several hints about and why my father started to change. It's important for you to understand. I mean, for Canadians and the whole to understand how it begins, how communism started to deep in society, because they never say we are communist. They say we want change, and they proclaim themselves as Democrats. They want democracy. That's the beautiful word they try to use to deceive people, innocent people, about the real goal. That's why if you go to history, you will see that for almost 2 years, Fidel Castro was denying that he was a communist. He was denying, no, I am a democratic man. I want democracy. I hate communism. And later on, 2 years afterwards, he said one day in April 1961, 2 years and 3 months ahead, he said, I have been a communist all my life. So with that assertion, he was showing that he was a liar, that he had lied to the Cuban people. When he fought the revolution, he signed agreements with the University Students Association, the Federation of University Students, who also fought against Batista's dictatorship. And he signed an agreement in Mexico with them, committing his revolution or his fight for a democratic change in Cuba, reestablishment of the last democratic constitution of 1940, and to reestablish all the rights of the Cuban people, and to convene to elections in less than 24 months. That was the program of the revolution. And he lied about all that. My father believed and supported that program. And that's why when Fidel Castro immediately started taking measures that were contrary to what he had promised in the program of the revolution, the agreement he had signed with the Federation of University Students, my father said, something is going awry in here. He started with nationalization, but not nationalization. Castro confiscated. Let me put it rightly. He nationalized foreign properties and businesses, and he compensated all other foreigners but the Americans. That's why the United States imposed the embargo on Cuba, because Castro refused to compensate the owners, the business people in Cuba. He denied. He said not at all, and he denied for several months until President John F. Kennedy set the embargo because of the denial of Fidel Castro to compensate, according to international law, the owners of properties and businesses in Cuba. But let's switch back to the first steps in the revolution and why my father turned away from that.
Let me interrupt. That turning away started to happen when you and your brother were in your teens. And yes, it really started to shift, as I understand by the timeline and putting things together, when you were entering university. Things started to really change. Yeah.
Okay, yes, indeed. At that time, Castro has taken several steps, starting to put communists in key positions, organizing a political police, organizing several confiscation of properties, changing the money, making several steps that I can go through a long time, an agricultural reform in which the property of a land, instead of going to peasants as he promised, went to the state. Yep. So my father was concerned about all those measures and advised us. At that time, we were in secondary education, close to enter the university, and my father told, "Look, I don't like what is going on." Castro created paramilitary forces, the militias. It was paramilitary forces. I don't like the turning in the country. So please do not get involved in politics. Keep away from politics. Just study as is your duty, and that's it. That was the advice of my father to me and to my brother.
But at this point, so to graduate university, so let's go back to you already mentioned that they confiscated and they eliminated all the religious schooling. They eliminated any kind of social organizations and transplanted their own. And in university, this is what I also didn't know. You needed to profess an affiliation with some sort of organization. It didn't matter what organization, as long as a community social organization, and you refused to do that. Why did you refuse to do that? What was it about those affiliations that didn't sit with you?
Okay. What communism does because I don't want to go into ideology because it's too complicated.
Well, you're here because of an ideology, right? You're here because you suffered under one.
I had to study Marxism, Leninism, communism, materialistic Marxism. My goodness, lots of subjects on communism I had to study at university. So I know Marxism quite well. Yes, but the main purpose of communism is to eliminate civil society as we know it, and the first step to dismantle that structure, that professional organizations, students organizations, women's organizations, humanitarian organizations, although that's tissue of society in different aspects away from the government, is completely eliminated. They are obliterated. They are all dismantled. And the regime creates its own civil society organizations, directed, led by them, by members of the Communist Party, and financed and organized by them. And that's what they did in Cuba. First, they created the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution. They created the militias, the paramilitary forces, as I mentioned before. They created new association for students, organized by leaders of a communist youth organization. And at all levels of society, they organized this new tissue of organizations, but led by communist leaders and under their control. And so The committees for the defense of revolution, for instance, are committees that they create in every block of every city and in certain areas of the rural areas.
Sorry, in every block?
Every block.
Holy
yes,
smokes.
every block, because they want control from that committee of every neighbor in that block.
Yeah, they want every neighbor accountable to each other, so that nobody can fall out of line.
And they kept a file of everyone living in that block, a file. They know who you are, where you work, well, how do you think, if you have religious opinions, if you have political opinions, if you participate in this, that, or the other, whatever of your life. It is, we used to say in Cuba, a relate your life file, because you have to tell them, they come to your house with a model where they ask questions and you have to answer those questions. Where were you born? What are the last 5 addresses you live on?
Right.
What school do you study? Primary, elementary education. Where secondary education? Where was your first school? What was your second school? What was? Do you have family abroad?
Everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
You have a religious opinion? Do you participate in religious celebrations or no? Whatever. It tells your whole life. And those committees kept a file with that information on every neighbor of that block.
You said that you had many friends, or there were many people who decided not to go to university because they knew that in order to graduate, they need to share more of themselves, and they didn't want to be in that system.
Correct.
But you decided to go to university and do the same, but then you were not allowed to graduate. Tell me what happened there. You went to engineering for a specific reason too.
Yeah, my vocation was to study law as my father, and I planned to enter a university law school. And when I was to enter law school at the university, I had to go through an interview. Well, they asked me, well, what is your political integration? Political integration means what, or those organizations I mentioned before of the civil society under communism I belong to, and I said none. They told me, well, if you do not belong to any political organization, if you're not integrated to the revolution, so you cannot study law. So because law is a preferred career for revolutionaries. So you're not considered a revolutionary. So even though I was 16 years old, you're not a revolutionary, so you cannot study law. So go to another career. So I was I was not decided whether I would go to university or no, but I had a friend who told me, Luis, I know communism and I know that they are going to impose the compulsory military service. And if you are not studying, you will be taken to the military service. So at the end, you will end up under their control. Sure. So it's better to go to the university and than going to the military. So I said, okay, I'll follow your advice. And I went to the university. My father had already died at that time, a year before. So when I decided to go to a career, I went to agricultural engineering or agronomic engineering. I don't know the term in Canada about the
agronomic engineering makes sense. Yeah?
Agronomic engineering, that's correct. And so I went to study that. When I finished my first year of agricultural engineering, I was called to the office of a university, of a school, and coincidentally, one of the officials at the office had been a friend of my father. Mm-hmm. And he told me, Luis, I am switching you to another career. And I said, I have not asked you to change your career. He told me, no, you have not asked anything, but I am changing you because I know who you are. I was a friend of your father. So I know you quite well since you were a child. So the issue is that you have a political integration? And I said, no. He said, okay, let me show you something. He opened a drawer, take out a sheet of paper and show me. Here, look at the last name, my name, Luis Zuñiga. You are on the list to be expelled from the university for lacking political integration to the organizations of our mission. So I'm going to expel you. So before they do that, I want to give you an opportunity to study more. So there is a career now at the university, a new career, industrial engineering, that no students want to go to that career because the books are in English. It's a new career. So the books are in English, are books from American and other countries' university. And no student want to study in English. So at that career that only have, at this time, it only had around 17 students, 1964. I said, and he told me, go there and they will tolerate you longer because they need students for that career.
Right.
I said, okay, well, if that's the issue, I have no option. So send me to industrial engineering. And so I started studying industrial engineering until I was in fourth year of industrial engineering. I already had been working because in Cuba, when you pass the second year of engineering or any other careers, you have to go to work. Not paid work, but you have to pay because they say it's training for real life. So I had to study 4 hours in the morning and work 4 hours in the afternoons or evenings. So I was already working. My first work was at a shambles with the industry of meat, and I worked there. While being on my third year of engineering, and on fourth year, I was sent to Cuba Café. It was the industry of coffee to design coffee processing. Mm-hmm. And so I started designing with other students those factories. And when I was at that time, I was called someday to the office of the Communist Party chief of the school. His name was Manzano, and he told me, Zuñiga, I have been looking through your file because you are close to graduation, and I am surprised that you have no political integration. And I said, no, I don't have any political integration. He said, why? Because I don't feel well involved in politics. I am trying to not to confront. Yeah. But the issue started getting hot. The guy was extremely pushy and started putting pressure on me. No, but how is that? How is it possible that you be an engineer and not be a revolutionary engineer, a communist engineer? I said, no, I'm not a communist. I am a Catholic. Come on, but you still believe in God, all that stuff. How is it possible that a professional, near professional guy is going to have belief in religious? Have you ever seen God? I said, nobody has said, yes, we have seen God. We have been the Jesus, the Son of God, that was presence, that was a materialization of the Lord, God, in Jesus. Yes, we touched it. I didn't. But in that area, and that time, the people touched him and was in touch with him. It is written. Those are the Gospels. So you can read them. My goodness, when I told him you can read them, he got mad.
And where did he send you?
And then we start arguing. The discussion got heated. And at the end, he told me, either you integrate or you will be expelled from the university and you will not graduate. I said, well, if that's the price I have to pay, I will not graduate. He said, no, but even more. We're going to take here to, in that times was usual to not to expel students freely saying, hey, go away. No. They take the students to a meeting where they created like a Roman circus, starting offending, calling names, and even
to
hitting
shame you, publicly
sometimes.
shame you.
That's right, correct. But with the students at the university level. And then I said, well, if you think that I have no rights, well, he told me, no, here there are rights and we respect rights. No. Fidel Castro says that education is a right of a people. And I am people. I am a Cuban. I am a citizen of Cuba. I was born here like you. So I have the right to education. You don't believe that's something that's you are not stupid. You understand what I'm saying. No, you are denying what Fidel Castro says.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't want to go into the small details about that issue. The issue is that he got mad. Even he grabbed me by the shirt and shook me, and I pushed him back, and then we start almost on a fight. All the professors came in because he had a secretary and he had all the people in the office. They came running and they intervened in the issue. And then he pointed to me and said, "You are going to pay dearly for confronting the revolution." And that was the beginning.
And you, at this point, you were about 20? Does that sound right?
No, I was at that time. Yes, I was 22 years ago. 22.
And they sent you to prison.
I had a very close friend who was a member, lady who was a member of a union of Jews communists. But he was a friend of mine in my neighborhood. And he came next day to my home and privately said, "Luis, you are in hot waters. They are sending the police to search your home. They want to arrest you. You are going to be in hot waters." So I ran away from home, went to a friend of mine who lived far away in another province. And exactly 2 or 3 days later, they made a search of my home, the political police, what do we call the security of the state police. And my mother was really scared because, she what's going to happen with him.
Mm-hmm.
The political police kept coming to my home, and they put guards trying to arrest me. And then I tried to get away, and at the end they grabbed me. They grabbed me and sentenced me for what they call at that time political deviation, or I cannot recall the right name that they labeled. They charge you with whatever they want because there is no justice or rights, legal rights in Cuba. So they charge me with something like altering the stability, something related to the stability of the revolution, and it sentenced me to 2 years in prison.
And you're 22 years old. All you wanted to do was graduate.
Yes.
So they sent you to prison. You made an escape.
Yes.
And you tried to reach Guantanamo Bay where the Americans were.
Correct. No, well, the first time when I escaped, I tried to reach Guantanamo Bay, and I was arrested just close to the fence.
And that was when? That was 2 years later?
2 years later, correct.
2 years later. So now we're talking 1967?
71.
Oh, sorry, 1971. Yeah, because we've been over this. And so then you were sent to prison again, and
Yes.
you escaped a second time.
Yes, because when I came back, when they put me back to prison and sentenced me to 4 years more in prison, they sent me to a punishment prison in Santa Clara, another province, a sealed cell, and they kept
a sealed cell.
Sealed cells, yes. They kept me there for 2 years in those sealed cells until 1973.
Holy cow. Okay.
Yeah.
So for 2 years, you're still in your early 20s, mid 20s, and you were spending all of your days in a sealed cell.
seal cell. Yes, 2 years.
And you escaped.
Well, they moved me later from that seal cell to a concentration camp. It was a prison, but was in fact a concentration camp because there were some barracks surrounded by 3 fences of wire of
barbed wire.
Barbed wire, correct. Yeah. 3 fences of barbed wire with docks around the between those fences, and even a moat full of water after the 3rd fence. So it was hard to escape from there. I had several prison mates that tried to escape and they were killed. So it was very hard to escape from there. But I devised a trick. I tied a rope around my leg, and with the advice of a doctor friend of mine, I had seen how can I get them to take me to a hospital or to the infirmary. There was no infirmary in that prison, so they had me to take to some other place. Mm-hmm. And he advised me on how to do that: to tie it up, give small pats on the leg, to swallow it, but not too hard, not to make bruises, but constantly. Yeah.
So to tie it on your leg, to tap it in order to create an inflammation, or what seemed like an inflammation.
Swollen.
Okay.
And it got so swollen that you have no idea how big my legs were.
Wow.
And I prepared for the escape. I took a piece of saw that used to cut iron.
Hacksaw.
Hacksaw, correct. A piece, because it was impossible, a large one. Yeah. So a piece of hacksaw, some money, and I prepared for the escape. Wow. So they came and they said, no, we're not going to take you to any hospital. No, you cannot be taken to. So my companions, my prison mates, start complaining and arguing and discussing. They feared that there was some sort of disorder in the prison. So they decided to take me to Santa Clara, the capital of the province, and put me into a how can I say? It's a clinic, but it's only for prisoners.
Right.
Only for prisoners. Mm-hmm. It was guarded with big walls on the sides around, but was in the city of Santa Clara. And I escaped from there. Got the three bars of a window. They have put a special guard under, besides all the security around the premises. But I succeeded in escaping because I was counting the time that the guard took to go around the building. And it's a long story. It had been written when I escaped from prison and from Cuba, and I got to the U.S. To the Guantanamo Bay, where I finally succeeded in crossing the minefield. When I got to the U.S., it was written by Reader's Digest. At that time was
Reader's Digest. Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah, it was a common magazine.
Yeah, I remember.
At that time, and yes, they dedicated me around 6 or 7 pages to all this story. It's an adventure, the escape and the going through the minefields and going into the Guantanamo base.
All you wanted to do was graduate. And now you find yourself trying to escape and going through a minefield in order to get to the Americans to escape.
Correct. To escape from Cuba, that's what. And Guantanamo was the best opportunity, was on land.
So to fast forward a little bit, you were successful in doing this. I mean, I'd love to go through the detail on how you went through a minefield. I can't even imagine.
Well, that's the story. It's written there, but in prison, there are people of every sort of life.
Yeah.
And there was a lieutenant who had been a prison guard at that border with Guantanamo Bay, and I asked him about the minefield. He explained to me how the border was organized: 3 fences, guards with German Shepherd dogs every hour, mm-hmm. going in around. He explained to me also the composition of a mine, like a number 5 in a dice. That was the composition of, and I asked him, well, and the people that work on those fields, how do they go through the field? And then he explained to me. It was very funny. He told me, you have to find two mines, because remember, you cannot push them on top, but you can touch them on the sides. So you find them by digging around.
So not taking steps
No,
over.
of course, you cannot step on them because 20 pounds is enough to blow it up.
So you have to drag your feet all the way through.
He explained to me that there is a cemetery there in Boquerón just for people killed in the minefields.
Holy smokes.
Cemetery. Illegal. Well, how can I say illegal? No, it's a cemetery there for digging them down there, for burying them down there. They do not report to the families. They don't find names, nothing. When they die, they put them in a hole, trash, and cover it up, and that's it. And that's it. And there have been so many that is a cemetery, an area in Boquerón for those. He explained that to me, and he explained how to go through the field, the minefield. And I tried to fulfill to do it, and I succeeded. At the end, I had some difficulty because maybe I strayed from the direction, but I succeeded.
You made it.
I got it.
So you made it. You were flown to Miami, so now you were on U.S. soil. But you're a glutton for punishment. That's not even the beginning of your story, because you came back because you promised your friends that if you escaped, you would come and save them.
Yes. I had many friends that were fighting against communism, that were conspiring against the regime, trying to change things up and so on. And they were hidden because they were persecuted. As they were identified, they are persecuted. But as there were so many former political prisoners in Cuba, that red of former political prisoners held those that needed to be covered, that needed to be hidden. So that was working perfectly at that time in Cuba. And I had friends that were in hide, they were hidden, and they helped me when I escaped. They helped me, they protect me, they hid me, they keep me, and give me what I needed to go to Guantanamo to escape. And
well, is it because were you the? I'm going to use the term, so excuse me if I'm using the incorrect term here to describe this. But were you the bravest of the group to go do that? Is that why?
No. Everyone needed. I had some other friends in prison that were about to fulfill their sentences, and they asked me about the Guantanamo minefields and so on. I explained it to them. I had at least 2 that I remember, and never they disappeared and never was known about them.
Yeah.
I mean that they died
in the cemetery.
In the process, yes. They died in the process, yes.
So okay, so you decided to you organized a boat, you rented a boat or you bought a boat, and you came back to Cuba by boat undercover, so to speak.
Yes. I had a friend who had escaped with me to the minefields and everything, Rodolfo Camps. He was a captain of ships. He was graduated from the academy. He was a captain, and he knew how to navigate. And so we were together, and together we went to Cuba for the infiltration, and we were 3. And one was to land, infiltrate, go to pick up those in hide, and bring them next day at dawn time to the coast to be picked up by us next day. That was planned that way.
And what happened?
Well, we succeeded. We infiltrated Cuba with a boat. We were dressed like captains of the army, dressed in their uniforms, and fishing like we were high up guys of a regime, and succeeded in landing him. We landed him with a bicycle, so that we will not depend on any vehicle or any contact with anybody.
Yeah.
Wearing a Cuba t-shirt, like a bicyclist in the Cuban team of cyclists.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And, but unfortunately, at the time of landing him in the area was an area with big rocks that we saw. We knew that place, Peñas Altas, New Havana, between Havana and Matanzas. That's an isolated place. But unfortunately, a kid was fishing at that time, and he saw the operation, and he ran to his neighborhood just to tell his brother and the other friends that he had seen a bicycle coming down from a motorboat. Unfortunately, our friend was. They put a roundup. They made a roundup around the whole area, and they grabbed him about 10 or 12 miles approaching, just entering Havana. At the time he was entering Havana, he was arrested there. He was captured there.
They were looking for a cyclist, is what you're saying.
Of
and
course.
They found.
It was easy to find because the cyclists,
Yeah, there aren't many around.
Yeah. And so we didn't know. At the following day, at early, before dawn, we were in the boat coming in to the area to pick him up, and they set a trap because they knew that he was infiltrated. So it means that he needed to get back. He needed to be taken out. So they set a trap, and they got us next day. When we went through, Coast Guards, large Coast Guards block our exit.
Your escape, your exit.
Yeah, our escape.
And so, what year was this?
It was 1974.
Incredible. And so, at this point, you're in your late 20s, and now you're
26, 27.
You're my life was just starting at 26, 27. I had the normal Canadian trajectory. I was going to get married. I was going to buy a house. I got my education.
At that age began my second prison term, 14 years more.
14 years. So you were now back in prison, and they were trying to re-educate you. You use that word.
As usual. That's a common practice in communist prisons.
And you said, as usual, meant you needed to reject your past decisions publicly, and you went through daily beatings and torture with no medical attention. Yes,
that's the usual practice. Listen, it was stated in the Soviet Union by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, who said that your enemies, re-educate them. And if they refuse re-education, destroy them. And when you confront or you become an enemy of a communism, they and you, of course, that confrontation takes you to prison. So they say, okay, you need to be re-educated politically. And so you have to follow. They have a program for re-education, which includes working hard, working from dawn to dusk, working all day long, and receiving political re-education classes, Marxism, and so on. And at the end, when they believe that you are completely bent down, that is, that you know that you cannot confront the communist regime anymore, is the time when they release you.
Let you go.
They release you. Yeah. But if you refuse re-education, they try to destroy you. And to destroy you, they use two methods: destroy you physically and destroy you psychologically.
Well, you said you lived for another 7 years in a sealed cell.
Correct. That was one of it. That was common practice against political prisoners refusing re-education. We were called by them plantados.
And what does plantados mean?
That they refuse re-education.
you told me about a movie, so I checked out the trailer. I've yet to see it, but I'm going to, and I'm going to. I'm going to suggest to the listener to check it out because it came out just the end of last year, the end of 2021. Plantados. Was that based on your story? Did you have input?
No,
in that?
not mine, because we were thousands.
Yeah,
there was
right.
a time
Okay.
in Cuba.
Sure.
There was a time
You were not
because
unique.
Cubans fought communism with all their hearts and all their will because it's so abusive, so oppressive,
Yeah.
so inhumane, the system, that at the end you have to fight, even though your life is at stake. You have to fight.
You didn't have to fight, Luis. So you didn't have to fight because people, you explained to me, and I asked you this. I mean, you have scars all over your bodies because of the beatings and the torture and so forth. You went through a lot of physical and mental pain. I mean, 7 years in a sealed cell I'd drive anybody cuckoo. But there were suicides were common in that prison because of this. And they could have killed you. I mean, at any point. Well, here's the question: why didn't they kill you? I mean, you were there
because they killed prisoners. They killed prisoners. They killed prisoners. I remember once in Santa Clara prison in the 2 years I told you I was in sealed cells after my first escape in Santa Clara prison, when the guard threw me, tried to stab me with a bayonet.
Holy smokes.
And the bayonet just exactly in the center of the sternum, right here.
The center of your chest, yeah.
And it did not sleep, because if that sleep a little, go through, push me or the heart or the lungs or whatever. Because
it hit your sternum, it hit your bone.
In the bone, and did not go through. If it had sleep or been a little to either side, have been go through. I never know if you have died or whatever. Lots, hundreds of prisoners have been stabbed, hit, maimed. There is a case close to me. It's out of, we have not spoken about that, because if I start telling stories of abuses and crimes, I will never end. In 19 years in prison, I have seen everything you can guess. I have here, they broke me, the skull. I have it fractured here of being hit with iron bars like this, just for refusing to be cut the hair by common prisoners.
You refused to have your hair cut by a prisoner.
Common prisoners.
A common prisoner. Oh, delinquent. Yeah, because you were not a delinquent. I mean, you wanted to graduate.
The common practice for us political prisoners, particularly plantados, was that they bring the scissors and how can I say, the
razors?
No, just to comb your hair. The comber.
Oh, comb.
The comb and the scissors for somebody cut your head off.
Yeah.
But at that time, in another province in Santiago de Cuba prison, Boniato, they wanted common prisoners to have our head cut. Yeah, we refused.
As a threat.
We don't want common prisoners close to us.
With a blade.
We are in prison because we fight for we want a free Cuba. But why are you going to lead us or have us in contact with common prisoners? That's no, we refuse it. But they hit us like hell.
Well, there's something insidious. Not something. All of this, what you describe as insidious. But to have somebody like you in that prison there for so long, it seems like they wanted you. You were like a pet project to see how long it would take to break you down, because they could have just disposed of you easily at the beginning, because you were obviously a troublemaker from the get-go. But they wanted a test, I guess, to see what your limits might be. Like you were probably an experiment that was being studied by these individuals.
You're right.
Or by the regime.
You're right. They were usually measuring our resistance. Sometimes they went out of control and they killed the prisoners. If I tell you the stories, it's hard to believe. Believe me, to put prisoners as punishment inside a cesspool full of
waste,
human
waste,
yeah. and hit them on the head to force them to deep down under the water. That's stories of abuse is unbelievable. I remember a case, for instance, I have not mentioned that to you because I told you too many stories of abuses and crimes, and it's unbelievable. Where people have no idea how criminal and abusive those guys are. It's not just in Cuba, everywhere. If you go to the history of Soviet gulags, it's the same. If you go to North Korea, it's the same. If you go to every communist country, it's the same. At a time, we were taken from our cells to a dining room across from the cell, just 10 yards away from the cell, and to get the lunch. The lunch was scarce. A little 2 scoops of soup. Soup was water, and a scoop of pasta. Pasta that you tastes to nothing, not even salt.
Yeah.
Just a mass in there. And then they were taking us 2 by 2. I mean, every 2 prisoners together. And I was with Eduardo Capote. Eduardo Capote was an extraordinary individual, a professor, a teacher.
Sorry, what was his first name?
Eduardo Capote.
Eduardo.
I can send you information about him.
Yeah, please.
In the newspapers, there is a historian, after he left prison, historian was on newspaper. Well, when we were taken out by the guard opened the cell, took those out. There were 200 prisoners in that gallery of the cell. We say cell, but it was a gallery.
Yeah.
200 prisoners. We were taken 2 by 2. The guard opened the door, the door to Capote and me, say, okay, go to pick your lunch. Capote was walking slowly, and the guard said, hey, hurry up. And Capote turned around. He had a plate. It was an aluminum plate, round and with the border like this.
And so it was high. It was a high plate.
High, yeah. And Capote, because there was everything together. No, not 2 plates for everything. No, 1 plate, and they put together the soup and the pasta.
So it was a bowl. It was more like a wide bowl.
Yeah, like a bowl, correct. Yeah. And then Capote said, "What for? To hurry up to get that trashy food that is worth nothing." The guard lifted up. He had instead of a bayonet, he had a machete. You know, it's a large knife, very large, used to cut cane on the field.
Yeah.
And threw him to his head. He threw a machetazo against his head. Capote covered up with one hand and cut this off completely. The four fingers completely out of one hand. And Capote said, "But why?" And the guy threw again. And he covered with the other hand and cut all, because he covered with this, and he had the plate in that hand, and the plate prevented from cutting completely. What he did was to cut all the tendons of the whole hand. He cut with his hand. His hand kept remained forever like this, and he lost 4 fingers of the other one.
So to defend himself, he put his hand up, just for the listener, because you were showing me here the motions, but he put his hand up to cover the blow, or to protect the blow, and that blow cut 4 fingers off one hand. He did it again, and he used his other hand, and the plate helped him not to lose his hand completely, but you said it's mangled. His hand is deformed. The other hand is deformed.
Yeah. So that's just a token example of the violence, the abusive the prison were subject.
Beyond my understanding. Luis, where did you? Again, the silly questions here. Where did you find the strength to keep going? Why didn't you off yourself? Why didn't you commit suicide?
Well, not suicide, because at that time you think that you are in a fight. I felt that that our example of confronting or not bending to the communist regime was an example for Cubans to fight, to struggle against the system. And we were conscious that we will become an example, and God bless it. We have become an example for now the younger generations in Cuba now, that they look at our sacrifices and our position as a strong will against communism, as a way to show that when there is courage, will, and conviction, there is hope for freedom and liberty.
Well, I mean, that worked for you, because
Yeah.
in the end, now we're reaching the late 80s. Something happened that helped things along finally.
Indeed. And then, of course, for me, most important were two facts. The first one, God. I am a Catholic, been all my life Catholic. We kept Catholic celebrations, Eucharist celebration in prison, even though we were persecuted. When we smuggle Bibles in, and when the guards we were searched, they searched the cells and the galleries almost on a 2 weeks average. Every 2 weeks average, they searched everything and took away anything they found that might be entertaining or might be of any use for us, because they wanted us to be bored, to be like nothing to have our time used for.
Yeah.
And so
they wanted you to be completely idle with no thoughts.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. And but we kept those celebrations. First we had the priests. We have several priests in prison for years. But later on, when all the priests were finally released, we lay people kept the celebrations, just changing the celebration, because we were not ordained to make the proper Eucharist, but with those changes, but kept the celebration and kept the masses and kept praying, and we tried our best to keep the faith for we all prisoners.
You were explaining this to me before, that your strong faith, your religious faith, is also what kept you strong and fortified against for your fight.
Correct.
So in 1988, I'm cognizant of the time here too. I want to spend hours on this, but I want to make sure that we also cover some of the important points that you had brought up last time that we still need to discuss. 1988, Human Rights Commission from the UN made a visit to Cuba.
Yes. In 1988, the Human Rights Commission decided that they had evidence of abuses in prisons and crimes they committed against the political prisoners. And the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations agreed to have a visit, not inspection, visit to Cuba. And one of the places they wanted to visit was a prison. And they came to the prison I was at that time. Of course, we have been in terrible conditions in a prison 1,000 miles away from Havana. But because of that visit, they took us out of the prison. We were sealed cells for 7 years. They brought us to a prison they have as a showcase for visitors and so on in Havana, Combinado del Este, just to deceive visitors of the Commission of the United Nations, as those were the conditions we had in prison. There was a prison window prison, just for that purpose. As usual, they deceive people constantly in their visit to communist countries. They have a route for visitors to take them, so that they made them believe that that's Cuba, as they did in the Soviet Union.
Everywhere. We'll talk about tourism as well. We can talk about tourism in Cuba.
Yes,
I mean, it's
indeed.
the same pattern.
The same story.
Yeah. So they made the mistake of choosing you as one of the prisoners to go to the showcase prison for the UN to see, for the UN committee to see. So what happened when you were there? Bring us through the confrontation.
Yeah. So they said, okay, one of you, we are going to. We knew because we usually kept a vine. A vine is communication outside the prison. And at that time, they were giving us visits with the family because they wanted to put us in a normal status for the commission. Just when they ask, are you having a family visit? Yes. Are you receiving the food? Yes. Are you this and that? Yes. So that show that it was normal with us until 3 months before was horrible. But
right.
they brought us to this prison, showcase prison, just to show, to pretend everything was normal.
Right.
And through that visit, we got information that the commission was coming to Cuba because the family told us. And so we prepared. And we wrote the evidences of crimes, abuses, assassinations, maimings, some case that some practice that is a practice that is not common or usually denounced, but this was common at the time, was to take political prisoners to psychiatric hospitals to abuse them there. Yes, we have many cases. I collected about 200 cases of political prisoners being taken to those hospitals. Wow. I had a friend, Eugenio de Sosa Chabao, was an intellectual, a very good friend of mine. He already passed away. That he was given electroconvulsive therapy in the testicles. So you may have an idea of what it is.
I've only watched movies to have that idea, so I don't have an idea.
Okay. Well, the issue is that we wrote most of those evidences with names, dates, and everything to provide to the commission if we had the opportunity to meet the commission. And the political plantados at that time, as I spoke English, they told me, Luis, you are the best just to speak to them because maybe you will need to communicate with them in English.
Yeah.
We don't know if they will speak Spanish or they will need a translator, and if the translator will translate properly or not. So I think that you are the right person just to address the commission. I said, okay, that's fine. So the prison never advised us of a visit of that commission, but we were on the alert.
You were prepared, yeah.
Yes. So one morning they came to the gallery and they said, okay, we're going to tell you to speak with some visitors that are coming to the prison. They want to talk to you about how do you live in here, food, everything that you are receiving now. So they want to speak with you about this. One of you who want to come? And I said, I. But in fact, they took two, Ernesto Diaz and me. Ernesto was another Plantado. And they took us over there to the office of the prison. And then it was like in a trial. It was a table where there were four or five foreigners sitting there. On the other side, there was a row of chairs or rock chair. Yeah, let's say chair, but they were not chair. They were more comfortable because they were generals of a minister of interior, political police, and the director of prisons. And there were about 10 of them sitting over there. And guards all over on the other side. And then the individual in front at the head of the commission was Alioune Sene. Alioune Sene was from Senegal. He was an African, very tall. He was about 6'5", and extremely strong. And he was the one to address me in English, and they had a translator, but I told him, no, I can understand you in English. And then the general said, no, I want Spanish. We don't want English, Spanish. So
they were there obviously to also intimidate you.
Yes, indeed.
Right.
And because they wanted to listen to everything I said.
Sure.
And so Allion Sene used a translator in Spanish from Spain. He was a member of his group from the United Nations who spoke Spanish and English both. And so Allion Sene started asking me questions. I want to ask you about treatment in prison and so on. And I start my speech. So you can guess.
Yes.
I told them from A to Z. Abuses, crimes, maimings, the still cells, hitings, beatings, killings, all
in front of these generals staring at you the whole time.
Yes. It lasted I was speaking for about 15 minutes, and then the president of the commission, Allion Sene, stopped and said, but please, who is responsible of those abuses? And I pointed to all the generals. Here do have them? Well, not them. The most responsible is Fidel Castro, their chief, the chief of them all, because they would not do anything if Fidel Castro would not allow them to do it. So the chief responsible is Fidel Castro. That's no doubt about it. But those are the executioners. Those are the operators of the abuses. So those are who give the orders. Those like there.
And then what happened?
So Allion Sene got very, very scared. I noticed in his gestures and so on, because he did not expect me. Maybe he did not expect me to point to the criminals in front of me.
Yeah.
They tried to intimidate. That's why they were there, to intimidate me and to try to put me on the excuses or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it was our opportunity to denounce them in front of international authorities. So I did. I knew that I was risking a beating or even worse. And so that's what Allion Sene thought, because I knew later on, about a year or year and a half later, that he had just written a letter to Fidel Castro telling him that he was highly worried about my safety, and that he wanted assurances that I will not suffer any consequences for having given testimony to the commission.
And then the next step is?
I was taken back. I was taken back, of course, to my cell and stayed there. Nothing happened. Indeed, they did not take any punishment because of what I did, and that stayed there.
They then eventually, a couple of months later, they flew you out. They sent you to an airport and off to the U.S.
Yes, the issue was that at that time Fidel Castro wanted the Pope to visit Cuba, and it was Jean Paul II, and the Vatican sent Cardinal John O'Connor of New York to negotiate with Fidel Castro. I knew all this later on when I left, when I was out of prison in the U.S. Cardinal O'Connor had several conditions or requirements for the Pope to visit Cuba. And one of those requirements was the immediate release of 3 political prisoners. Juan Jané, José Pujal Mederos, and Luis Zuñiga. we 3 were Catholics in Plantados. At that time, there were only about 35 political prisoners Plantados left in prison, because most of them had fulfilled their prisons or terms in prisons. It was in 1988.
So they sent you to the airport where you saw your mom. So they sent your mom off as well.
Yes, they came to one day. They came to my cell and they told me, "We want to take measures of you sizes." Okay. They took sizes and they say, "Let me take your picture." They took me to the prison, to the office of the prison. They took me to prison. It was common for the guards to keep updated photograph just in case of escape. So that's why they used to every 2 years, more or less, they used to take pictures of us, real pictures, and I I did not know why. And a few days later, they came to the cell, and they say, Luis Zúñiga, come with us. I was taken out to the office of the prison. There, they gave me a civil clothes, plain clothes. They handcuffed me, and they put me with a card of the security of the police, the state security police,
Mm-hmm.
uh, with three guards, three officers, and they took me to the airport. And then at the airport, I was informed that I was told that I was being sent to the U.S. And I said, no, I will not live without my mother. They said, no, your mother is here. Your mother is living with you. We already spoke with her, and she accepted, or she was willing to leave the country with you. And so they kept me there. A few minutes later came the U.S. interest section chief, the chief of the U.S. interest section. At that time, there were no embassy of U.S. in Havana, just an interest section. And the chief of the interest section came personally, and he signed my visa to enter the U.S. They gave me the picture they have taken me was on the passport. So they had made me a passport. I was given the passport, or put it in my pocket because I was handcuffed. They put it in my pocket with the visa signed by the chief of the interest section, and they took me to the plane, to the stairs, because there was no jetway. The plane with the aircraft was parked just the outside
Mm-hmm.
the building, outside the building, and with the stairs. And I went at the stairs. They removed the handcuffs and say, "Okay, you're free." And then I went up the stairs, and then in the plane, and it was really, really, how can I say, impressive when I entered the aircraft. All the passengers were already in the aircraft, and the captain of the plane was an Eastern airline plane. The captain took my hand and said, "Welcome to the United States of America. Now you are a free man. Welcome." It was
Amazing.
amazing.
41 years old.
And all the passengers start clapping.
Amazing. You were 41 and you started your second chapter of your life in the US. You had to start a career. You studied managerial accounting, you became an accountant, you had a daughter who now you also have grandkids through that daughter. So you've been living in the US since. And sorry, I'm just filling in some blanks here too, because I want to talk about for the last few minutes on some of the other things that are important to you. And that you continue to fight for Cubans' right to freedom.
Correct.
And that's how we started this conversation. So let's, for a few minutes here before we go, let's understand a little bit more here. And when I say let's, I mean the listeners, us. What is really going on in Cuba now? So as a tourist, there are a lot of Canadians, a lot of Europeans that go to Cuba, obviously not Americans, that go to Cuba. What is it? I forgot even about, I'm not even going to ask you what is it. So you've educated me. You said the tourist industry is owned by the military.
Yes. All the corporations, they make corporations just to administer, to manage tourism industry. All big hotels, resorts, taxis for tourism, stores at the hotels, restaurants. Most restaurants in Cuba, most for not say now, not 100%, but 99%, 99.5% of all businesses are state-owned. And those businesses that relate to the tourist industry are owned by the military. And the military had its own budget, its own administration, is aside from the government. Aside, they keep their money in the Banco Financiero Internacional, International Finance Bank. It's a bank managed by them, and they keep their money, their income out there. So it has nothing to do. That money is not passed on to the budget, to the national budget.
Tourist dollars into Cuba goes directly to military coffers.
To the military. They are formerly they paid before the military took control of a tourist industry. It was in the 1990s. Generals, for instance, were paid in Cuban pesos. But after the military took control of a tourist industry, they started to pay generals in dollars.
There's also another thing. You told me 3 specific things that happen in Cuba now that people should be aware of. The second is locals. Cubans are not allowed to speak to tourists, and
Correct.
that they're under watch.
Well, they do not say you are forbidden. This is the action that determines the rule. And those hotels where tourists go, there are paying civilian clothes officers. They're wearing civilian clothes. You don't know that they are officers, but they are political police. They are around all those areas where they are. The stores, the restaurants, the hotel, the 2-3 blocks around, they are around the area to prevent, first of all, for them to be assaulted, to be mocked, to protect them. Because there is a high degree of violence and assaults, stealing in Cuba because of the needs, of course. So protect tourists from that risks, safety, and also to prevent Cubans to speak with tourists. So if for instance, a dissident approach a tourist to speak or to tell them about the reality, the tragic life of Cubans, the repression they are under, they are watched by the political police, and they keep an eye on the guy. And when he take part with the tourist, they arrest him. And they, in some cases, first time they are given a warning, but if he repeats, he go to jail. That's common practice in Cuba. So you will never see Cubans willingly approaching tourists to tell about Cuban reality. So tourists will have no opportunity to know what the life of a Cuban is. Besides, they don't want, even if a tourist asks them, they will be somewhat doubtful about telling the tourist, because they don't know if a tourist is an accomplice of a regime. It's a trap to arrest him.
Incredible state of fear.
Yeah, it's a police state. Police state.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's quite obvious. And if it wasn't obvious before this conversation, it should be obvious to us now. Yeah. And the other thing the third detail that you shared with me last time is about investor dollars. So corporations who invest in Cuba, the monies that flow in from these investors, these corporations, don't go to pay salaries. They go directly to the state.
Correct. Yeah. So now you have Canadian enterprises investing in Cuba. They have businesses in Cuba. And so they can tell you the regime does not allow any foreign investors to pay businesses in Cuba to pay directly to workers, to Cuban workers. They have to pay the money to the government, and the government is the one that pays the workers, but with 10% of salaries that those companies pay for the worker.
It dubbed it the new slavery.
It's the same practice that they use with doctors. For instance, Cuban doctors are taken to different countries in the world to work as doctors, but the contract is signed by the regime, and the regime signs another contract to the doctor. So those countries receiving the doctors pay the Cuban regime, and the Cuban regime pays them 10-15% of those salaries. 10 or 15. United Nations already classified that practice that the Cuban regime uses with doctors and others, because not just doctors. There are also sport trainers. There are also truck drivers. There are also seamen around the world in contracts. But it's the same practice. The companies pay the Cuban regime, and the Cuban regime pays 10 or 15% of those salaries to the worker. That's the United Nations. That's why United Nations classified or identified this practice as new slavery, neo-slavery, slavery in modern times.
This has been beyond fascinating. I think fascinating is an understatement. This conversation with you, Luis. Thank you so much. This has been a grand education.
I think it is important for not just Canadians, for everybody around the world, because they have no access to know all these stories. You have to, and foreign journalists in Cuba, they know that they cannot tell anything of this, because if they do, they are immediately expelled or put in prison. So they don't speak about that. They know the rules. Those are unspoken rules. They have to abide by. Like dissidents in Cuba cannot speak to foreigners, to tourists, because they know they pay consequences. They're going to be arrested. They're going to be put in prison. So those are rules. They keep quiet, and the story goes on and on and on. I know that Canadian tourists are unaware of this. For instance, until the 2006, because it was Raul Castro who stopped that practice. Cubans were not allowed to enter, not just to register and to stay at a hotel, not just to enter the building. Cubans were not allowed to go into hotels for tourists. Those hotels, 3, 4, and 5-star hotels, were only for tourists. Cubans were not allowed.
The only thing I can tell you, Luis, is something that you don't need me to tell you, is keep up the fight.
I do.
You really are an example. Thank you for being open, sharing your story. I contemplated asking you this one last question. I chose not to about a few minutes ago, and I'm not listening to myself. I'll ask you one last question. And it's a question we like to ask our listeners here, but it's important. I think it's important, especially in this case, to know more your thoughts on this. What is greatness to you?
To be in peace with your conscience. The conscience is the presence of God in every human being. I know it quite well. I can tell you many stories about personal experiences I have had in my life. And I tell you that being in peace with yourself, doing the right things in your life, is the best thing for yourself and for your future. I don't want to speak about afterlife or anything like that, but I can tell you that when you are at peace with your conscience, you are a happy individual. It doesn't mean if you have money, if you have good living or bad living, but when you are in conscience with your life. I have been in prison, as you already know, in terrible conditions, hunger, all my prison terms. 99% of the time I spent in prison was suffering hunger. I was always hungry, as all prisoners were. No medical attention. I had nephric colics, and not even an aspirin was given. So I had to jump just to ease the pain. So I felt at ease with myself because I had the conscience that I was doing the right thing. And when you do the right thing, you are a happy individual.
I use the word envy at the beginning of the conversation, and I use envy in a serious tone, but not in a malicious sense. I've I've envied listening to your story of strength. That is the lesson for me. And I'm sure the listener here has learned much more than that, but that one there for me is number one. Again, Luis, I can't thank you enough, but thank you again.
Well, Luciano, let me tell you something. I have friends, billionaires. I have friends extremely poor. I have been blessed and happy to have met many presidents around the world. I have met several presidents around the world. I have given the opportunity to give lectures at Congress in different countries. I have been a lecturer, as you mentioned before in the presentation, at universities around the world. And I have been blessed that even my last lecture was in Colombia, at the University of Cali in Colombia. And you know what? I had 3 former guerrilla men leaders in that group. I was at the School of Law and Political Science at the University of Cali, and the chief of the school told me that it had been the first lecture that he had seen at the university where no one stood up or went to the bathroom for the 2 hours of a lecture. And you know what was the lecture of? About communism, about what it means and what is the danger for the world with that system that is still alive. Thank you, Luciano.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you so much.
Hey, it's Enrico Colantoni here, actor, director, and dedicated napper. Like what you heard today, there's more to come. Make sure to subscribe to Behind Greatness and learn about our live events at inspirenorth.com. You'll also find links to our social media right on our website, so be sure to give us a like and follow. Until next time, stay inspired.